before we get into anything, let's do a roll call again, just to make sure everybody's here and everything's working. Councillor Foster?
Present.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Present.
Councillor McElwain?
Present.
Councillor Kittredge?
Present.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Here.
Councillor McCrae?
Here.
Great. Ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Okay, seeing none. We did have a closed meeting, and I have a recommendation out of closed meeting that I will read right now. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington authorizes the Mayor and Clerk to execute minutes of settlement in relation to Graham Park, including the indemnity and release. And that authority is delegated to the Chief Administrative Officer to sign the acknowledge and direction of authorizing the conveyance of Graham Park Block A, Plan 548, to the Township for nil consideration and any other documents as may be required by Township Legal Counsel to complete the acquisition of Graham Park. I have a mover for that recommendation, please. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that is carried. So that takes care of our closed session meeting. Moving on to presentations, announcements. I just have a brief county update. Right now, the county is focused on working through our 2021 budget. At our meeting last Monday, so January the 11th, Council provided direction to our staff to cut the budget, increased in half from a 2.5% to a 1.25%, and that passed our council vote in a 14-to-1 vote at a committee level, and that will be coming to council. We've been working with each of the standing committees right now, working towards achieving that target by next week's Administration, Finance, and Human Resources Committee meeting next Tuesday, and hopefully that will be approved at County Council next Thursday. So it would be nice to get that budget completed as well. Just a little, that's all for the county update. Just a little reminder to councillors. There was an email that we received on Friday that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Reminding councillors that we cannot advance the business of government outside of a public meeting at council. That's really not legal, and we can't do it. You can issue friendly amendments to a motion over email. So from now on, if you do want something to get out to all council, please go through the CAO and clerk, and our clerk will help you make sure that we do this appropriately. The principle is really simple. Council needs to debate, discuss, and make decisions in a forum that's open to the public. So email discussions that aren't open to the public are not allowed, and that's an illegal closed meeting. So we can't be doing that. Is there any questions about this from council? Our clerk is here, and she can respond to anything, because this is something that's really critical. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I believe you're referring to the email from Councillor Kittredge. My sense is he was trying to table a document for today's agenda rather than engage in a discussion at the time. So I'm wondering if I can get some clarity. You know, given the Zoom meetings and the difficulties of when we're not meeting in person, how do you, how can we possibly construe that as a meeting when no discussion was intended and none occurred? It was an attempt, I believe, to get a document on in advance of today.
Yeah, it was a friendly amendment to a motion. Friendly amendments need to come through a council meeting. And as I mentioned, the appropriate way to do it is to send something to our CEO and clerk and ask for their advice on how to get something in council's hands, not to all of council, because that is a discussion and that has to come at an open meeting at council. I'm going to ask our clerk if she has anything to add to that.
Through you, Mayor Linton, that's appropriate. While I appreciate the heads up for record keeping purposes, the time to bring forward an amending motion would be at the time the motion was considered at the appropriate meeting. The business of council is not to be conducted by email. It must be done in an open forum that is accessible to the public. This email was sent to members of council, myself, the CAO, and at least one member of the public. So it could very well be construed that council is conducting business behind closed doors inappropriately without the proper notice. So it's just a friendly reminder to council that by all means you can contact the CAO or myself for the appropriate way to bring things forward. But it is not through email, and it is not including all of council, staff, and members of the public.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. The reason for this was not to have any discussion. The reason is that because of the confinements that we have with electronic meetings, and with the past, as I explained, the past experience that I've had, when I've tried to bring forward amendments during the meeting, I was not allowed to because they were too long. And that is not a reason that, so it was to help that clarity and focus and wasn't about discussion. And so that was really the intent of that. The other thing is that because of our procedural bylaw, where you can waive the notice, I mean, it's impossible, and I have experience with that if you don't have any documents for preparation, you would be caught off if that were to happen. And so that becomes a problem. And it's a deficit that we have with the procedural bylaw, which we are actually in the process of trying to clarify and, with the draft. So that was the intent. There was no intent to have discussion before it, just as preparation so that everyone could have the document before them, they could read it. And so if the process is that we should have it and send it before, that is not clear in our present procedural bylaw that is the process. So if it is that, it wasn't intended to be any discussion, and it is just so that when it happens, if it were to happen today, that there would be the documentation and the people would have a clear sense of what might happen, and they could read it and understand it. Because if with electronic meetings, you can't do that. You can't have the day of the meeting and then where you would say, I'm going to amend this, and then you could pass it around, and that's what we've done in the past. And so that seemed to be okay. And that was what I was understanding that I was trying to achieve with this.
Okay, thanks for clarifying the intent behind it. Is everybody clear on the process as it now stands, though? If you have an amendment, if you want to advance something that's on the agenda, if you could connect with the CAO and clerk about anything that's in the upcoming meeting. Is everybody clear with that process going forward? Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. Is this process something that is actually in our procedural bylaw as it stands presently, or is this something that an interpretation of that for our present procedural bylaw, or is this something that is now being voted on or decided without, like, as a consensus? So I'm just wondering where this stands right now, if it actually is written in the procedural bylaw that we have right now.
Well, I know, and I'll turn it to the clerk after I answer what I know. I know the Municipal Act makes it really clear that you don't advance the business of government without proper notice and without the public being involved. So that's a basic principle of parliamentary procedure, and that's what we're trying to avoid here. So That's just a principle, and we've talked about this. I know in our initial council orientation way back in 2018 and 19, we talked about this right off the bat. Is that there's been a lot of cases of municipalities who have gotten into serious trouble because they have had what's been termed email meetings, and we want to make sure that we don't go down that path. The discussions, the debate, and the decisions and the opinions of council have to be done at a public council meeting. And it doesn't just mean that it's just discussion. It's expressing your opinions that should be expressed during a council meeting so that all of the public is aware of what was said and how things were decided on. That's just a principle of good democracy, and I think it's reflected in both, and is directed by the Municipal Act, and I think it's reflected in every procedural bylaw that's out there right now. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, you're kind of actually talking about two different things, and I thank you. You're absolutely right about the perception that council is furthering the business behind closed doors. But we're also talking about putting forward an amending motion. That right now we are giving notice of a notice of motion. Notice is given. So the appropriate time and perhaps the appropriate method would be to wait until the meeting where the amendment potentially could be proposed. And if you submit it prior to the clerk, we can by all means, if it's lengthy or complex, we can share our screen during your proposed amendment to a motion that's on the floor. There's lots of different ways. If you work with us prior to, there's lots of different ways that we could come up with to make sure that, first of all, your amendment is clear to everyone. Your amendment is presented in a public and open meeting, and for everyone to see at the same time. And if sharing the screen is something we can do to make sure that everyone reads it at the appropriate time, at the appropriate place, then working with us prior to is the answer to that.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I just want to share with everyone a little book that I picked up from the Ontario Ombudsman about open meetings guide for municipalities. Under the heading, "What about meetings conducted over the phone or by email?" As the definition of meeting requires a quorum of members to be present, a meeting cannot occur over email or other remote forms of communication. Although emails and other remote forms of communication are not subject to the open meeting rules, municipalities should endeavor to apply consistent standards of transparency and openness regardless of the means of communication. The open meeting rules call for discussions that advance council business or decision-making to take place in public. Any exchange wherein council votes, reaches consensus, provides direction or input to staff, or discusses or debates a proposal, course of action, or strategy should be reserved for official meetings of a council, local board, or committee. So, yeah, we shouldn't be sending around these sort of emails.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McCray, for your comments. I just want to point out, in this case, no discussion occurred. This was the sharing of a document, not a meeting, and no one voted on it, no one contested it, no one debated it. Councillor Kittredge shared a document, that's it. I cannot see how that can be construed as having a meeting when no one responded and no one discussed the matter and no one voted on it, as Councillor McCray just pointed out straight from the Ombudsman. The question then becomes, and I have seen this in this term of council, where just before a meeting starts, someone wants to share a document, and whether in person or electronically. And I have seen during this term of council where in one case the document was shared and in other cases it was not. And so we have a procedural problem here, and I believe it's interpretation. And how are we going to address that? And what has to happen if you wish to share a complex document in preparation in advance of a meeting? How do we do that?
Okay, so there's a few different things. You've thrown out a number of things. The first thing is we did receive comments back from Councillor Kittrus's email from members of the public. That's furthering the business of council. So whether or not Councillor Kittrus intended for a discussion to happen, he initiated discussion by putting his opinion out there. So that's furthering the business of council. So I don't think we have to talk too much more about that. That's pretty clear. As far as you know, a paper drop prior to your council meeting, we just, again, it goes back to what our clerk just talked about. Let's try to give each other notice of things. It's not fair to drop something on our laps prior to a council meeting and expect that all of us are going to be prepared to talk about something. So we laid out a pretty clear process, provide some advance notice, talk to the CEO and clerk, and they'll make sure that it gets into the hands of council in an appropriate way and is publicly available in an appropriate way. It really isn't that difficult. There's nothing wrong with our process the way it is. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way things can continue to work appropriately for all of us. So I don't know if there's much more to talk about this. This is a pretty simple principle. Councillor Kittrus, one last comment.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank the clerk for clarifying that of sending it to her, because that wasn't clear to me, that I would have to do that, and then she would figure out ways of incorporating that. And I think that the whole of council and the clerk can accept that I'd had experience of the fact that a notice was waived and I was totally unprepared. No one spoke to me about that might be happening, and so this was in that intent that I just wanted to make sure that there would be clarification if that happens. And if it doesn't happen today, well, then I will work with the clerk and the CAO and achieve that result.
Thanks, Councillor Kittrus. Thanks, Council. Moving on to report from Councillor committees. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I really don't have a report. Centre Wellington Hydro, we meet in about 2 weeks' time. I'll have a more fulsome report then. Healthy growth and seniors have not been meeting, so not much to report. Thank you.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we met last week with Economic Development via Zoom. It was a good meeting. We continue to speak about how we can further the business and small business within the township, especially think in regards to the BIAs and how to especially find sectors that are struggling, sectors that may have gotten missed. We also had some discussions on the development of the industrial land, how to proceed, what are our next steps. The committee is continuing to work in multiple little areas for sure to see what can happen. It's very tough to do anything at this time through January lockdown, but they're doing what they can. So thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Councillor McElwain, anything from physician recruitment or the Purtis BAA or the Elora BAA?
Physician recruitment, we met last week, and not much to report there. It's just our numbers through Healthcare Connect say that the trend is down as far as residents waiting for doctor care. So it's good news overall, but it's still not zero, but it's certainly trending downward. I did have a couple of other things I wanted to mention while I have the opportunity. The first one I missed in December, and I feel badly about that, but Spears Electric just passed their 75th anniversary in mid-December, which makes them, I believe, the second oldest company in all of Centre Wellington, and I'd like to congratulate them and their third third generation of ownership of Spears Electric and successful business lasting for 75 years is a pretty significant move. The other thing I was wanting to mention was the fact that the Elora Mill just was acknowledged as, I'm looking for the exact name here, the #1 spa and wellness destination in Canada by Spas of America. So that's a pretty huge honor for them as well. So congratulations to both of those companies.
Thanks, Councillor McElwain. Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I haven't had any meetings for farm safety for basically 8 months and 9 months. Social housing, we meet every other month, but we didn't have the December party, and so there's nothing to report. The safe communities, I missed one of the meetings. It's pretty sporadic because we can't really do anything in the community. And that's nothing's really happened.
Thanks, Councillor Kittrus. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor. The CSAC committee is working on the community grants. We received a very detailed file from Dorothy Smith, who's put together all the grant applications, as well as a grading system. And so CSAC will be meeting next month to go through that. We'll have recommendations for the council as to how those grants should be dispersed shortly thereafter. So we continue to work on that. Stephen brought up the Economic Development Committee. There was a little bit of frustration, you know, you get as far as we've gotten through this pandemic, and here we are back to the start again. So they continue to brainstorm activities and ideas and stuff and way we can support local businesses and help them get through this when this current lockdown ends and we can get back at it. So we did a good job the last time, and I think they'll probably have discussions based on what we can do going forward. So that's it.
Thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you. Water and wastewater QMS. The media campaign to reduce wipes, rags, and gloves, as well as fats, oil, and grease in the wastewater has helped, but public still needs to do more to stop its entry into the wastewater system. It's plugging up our pumps. There were no water main breaks this quarter. All 750 hydrants received their annual operation and maintenance checkup. A raw water assessment assessing historical sampling and monitoring data for the 2015 to 2020 period determined our source water no deterioration has occurred and our current water treatment processes remain appropriate. GRCA, CEO Lawson provided an update of Schedule 6 of Bill 229 that received royal assent. An ad hoc committee of the board will be established to provide input and direction on adapting to Conservation Act changes resulting from Bill 229. Chairperson Helen Jowett stepped down at the end of the year. She has held the position of chairperson for 5 years. A new chairperson will be elected at this Friday's annual general meeting. The board received a year-end update on conservation area projects and operational matters, as well as COVID's impact. The board approved the funding application to the National Disaster Mitigation Program to complete a variety of flood mitigation projects in the Grand River watershed, and for the GRCA to provide $420,500 in matching funds from our WECI grants, land sale, proceeds reserve, and other reserves. And finally, we received an overview on watershed conditions throughout 2020, highlighting flood events, water levels, annual temperatures, and overall precipitation.
Thanks for that, councillors. I just wanted to thank all the volunteer members of all of our committees that we've just heard updates for. Takes a lot of their time to volunteer on our advisory group. So I wanted to thank them all from our community and our members of council for putting in the hours. It's also not easy for them to be doing this work over Zoom. Some have an easier time meeting over Zoom than others, but I know it's difficult to be on Zoom meetings all the time. So thanks to all our volunteers who play such an important role in our advisory committees. I'm also wanting to pass it over to our CEO to just give us a brief verbal update on COVID. So, Andy?
Great. Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just this past Saturday, the province did extend the provincial orders until February 19th. We're currently coordinating our services and operations with all the other Wellington County municipalities in the county. The mayors, the CAOs, the public health, OPP, and paramedics are meeting weekly to plan and coordinate the response to the second wave and the new provincial emergency. Our Centre Wellington Emergency Operations Center continues to meet weekly to manage and coordinate our operations locally. Township recreation, tourism, culture facilities and services are the most impacted by the provincial emergency and remain closed. Parks and Rec staff are in continuous contact with other Parks and Rec municipality operations throughout Southern Ontario to work through the various issues regarding interpretation and requirements of the provincial order, as well as health unit guidelines. Our parks operation does remain normal, and in fact, we've seen increased use of our trails and parks and toboggan hills and our ice rinks as they begin to develop. Especially some of the neighborhood rinks that we have our community volunteers assisting with. Our urban forestry and capital projects continue as normal. From a staffing point of view, operations in all other areas are continuing as usual, with many staff now working from home. At Christmas, all community services part-time staff were put on emergency leave for a total of about 62 employees. And our crossing guards are also on leave until the schools reopen. Community services staff are continuing to work with our user groups and customers on preparing for reopening, including possible shortened ice season. There's still a desire by many of the organizations to get back out onto the ice as soon as we're possible. Several community services programs are now online and have been continued to online throughout the pandemic. And staff are increasing these services and programs, especially for our seniors, and a number of our staff are also reaching out to our seniors on a regular basis to ensure that their safety. Staff will be removing one ice pad this week, possibly a second pad pending our discussions with our user groups, and are looking at some required tile and grout work in the pool that would be beneficial to complete during the pool closure. Several full-time staff in community services are being redeployed to various areas to assist with work. Some are going to public works for sidewalk plowing. A few public works staff left in just around our Christmas time, so this is helping to fill our gaps within that area. We're also having staff go over to assist our public works staff on our rural address signage installation to improve emergency response. This is something the council initiated and have provided with all the signage, so our staff will now be working together to make that happen. Staff are also going over to assist the planning and development staff with the Rural Heritage Registry work and bylaw documentation and scanning into electronic formats. In our parks, we have several staff that are being redeployed to our park patrol in order to monitor and educate public on our outdoor ice rinks, as well as our storm ponds to ensuring that we can keep everybody safe. Some parks and washroom maintenance, so they'll also be doing as we have increased use and seeing a lot more garbage and litter through our parks. Other facility operators are monitoring our buildings, doing some facility maintenance. Excuse me. Garbage in our garbage in our parks and downtowns is increasing. So we're doing more frequent garbage pickup in those locations, and also assisting our neighborhood groups and community volunteers with our outdoor natural ice rinks, which hopefully starting today with the colder weather, we'll have more success in providing good ice for the community. We've seen an increased number of ice rinks being asked for this year, which is great news. And we want to thank our community volunteers for taking on that work. And staff will also be operating 2 outdoor ice rinks, one at the Sportsplex and one at the community center, to provide for more opportunities so that people can spread out and social distance. We continue to monitor the situation daily, and we will make the required changes as necessary and be reporting back to council at our February meeting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks very much, Andy, for that update. Any questions from council on Andy's verbal update, Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering, Andy, if there was discussion about the length of this, considering that the vaccines are not really, they're short of them, and the vaccines aren't really coming into full until April, of whether we would be extending this possibly to April.
Thank you, Councillor Kittrus, through you, Mayor Linton. We did just have a meeting this morning. Dr. Mercer did confirm that this week's vaccines were slowed down. However, they've had assurances that the number of vaccines that they'll be receiving over the next weeks and months will continue, and they anticipate seeing those numbers increase substantially in April. I think listening to General Hillier over the weekend, they're hoping to have a mandate of a target to have all of Ontario, those that want to be vaccinated, happening by the end of July. So at this stage, what's good about the numbers this weekend, this past weekend, numbers are declining in Wellington County, in Wellington, Dufferin, Guelph. So we're hoping to see continuing declining, with the hopes of returning to orange or yellow, hopefully later in February or earlier in March.
Thanks very much, Andy. Thanks, Councillor McRae.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. Maybe this is a crazy idea. This morning I walked by the Elora Arena and I saw the Zamboni out cleaning the ice on the outdoor ice pad. I'm wondering if it's possible to use the Zamboni to help at other outdoor rinks in the area.
Yeah, I can speak to that in fact, if you want. We can't drive that legally around on the community on the streets. We would have to actually be trucking it around. And at this stage, we're still keeping the two of the ice pads in with the hope that we're being. So we are using the one at the Sportsplex and one at the ECC. But the access to be able to get that to other locations is limited given the drivability and movability of that to various locations. Pat, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you addressed the situation. I think possibly people don't realize that those tires have studs on them, and that's so that they can maneuver on the ice. But as soon as you try and take them onto asphalt or concrete or the roads, it wears on the tires. So we would have, just as you said, it would be very difficult to move them around.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Andy. So moving on to section 7, I have a recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington confirm the agenda for the meeting held January 18th, 2021. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to our confirmation of minutes. I have council minutes from December the 14th. I have a recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held December 14th, 2020 be adopted as circulated. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor McRae, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. Any question about those minutes? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Moving on to 9, we have our report from the Committee of the Whole from January 5th, and that was our budget meeting. So I have a recommendation here that Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve the report from the Committee of the Whole dated January 5th, 2021 as circulated. Councillor McElwain? Sorry, you're on mute still.
Okay, sorry, could we vote on number 5 separately, please?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'll read the first recommendation that items 1 through 4 from the report from the Committee of the Whole dated January 5th, 2021 be approved. I have a mover for that recommendation, Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor McRae. All in favor of that recommendation? Opposed? And that is carried. And the second recommendation would be that item 4 from the report from Committee of the Whole dated January 5th, 2021 be approved. Sorry, item 5. Let me read that again. That item 5 from the report from the Committee of the Whole dated January 5th, 2021 be approved. I have a mover for that recommendation, please. Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that
Can we
is...
have discussion on that, Kelly?
Sure. I went a little fast there. Sorry about that. I was going to suggest that because we had an opportunity to express our opinions on this, I would like to hear from anybody who had a change of vote on that one for sure, but I didn't want to go through the whole process that we went through on January 5th. So I will go around the room and let everybody explain how they voted, because this is an important document, our budget for 2021. So I'll go around the room and ask how people want to vote on this. Councillor Foster?
Kelly, could you just read it for the benefit? Could you just read number 5, please?
Oh, sorry. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington adopt the 2021 budget. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. We all know this was a very difficult year. I've already spoken about how this was the year for 0%. I call for a recorded vote on this matter, and I think we have failed by not bringing forward a 0% increase. So my vote is no, and I call for a recorded vote.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Foster, and I'll make sure that our clerk does go through the recorded voted process. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. I haven't changed my vote. I did give my comments the last time, but I think that it's been a good process and a long process. I really appreciated it this year through the summer, determining the different capital projects to giving direction to staff way ahead of time, and for us to come in a bit below the budget in a year that costs don't seem to change much when you have a place still operating. I'm happy with this budget. We did whatever we could to try to cut. So it's of course I'd always love a 0, but I'm happy with where we're at.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. This year I came into the January 5th meeting with the intent to agree with the budget because it was close, but it needed a couple of tweaks. And my problem with it this year, and I mentioned it during that meeting, is that we had next to 0 opportunity to talk about any tweaks or changes or get clarification or anything else. We, as the budget mentioned, we gave direction back in June that we were going to aim or go for a budget below or equal to the calculated township index, when the calculated township index was 1.4%, but the calculated township index ended up being 1.07%, and we didn't hit that, and we didn't seem to even try. And that I suggested a small tweak just for conference expenses, and that discussion was cut off before it even happened. And just a couple of small tweaks could have brought the budget down to 1.07%. Just the fact that when we dropped the fees for the sportsplex for Parks and Rec, we dropped them. We were told by Dan that the cost was approximately $20,000, equal 0.14%. But when we looked at the final budget, we added on 0.19% instead of 0.14. I mean, that 0.05% might have brought it down to something a little bit more manageable. So there was a lot of little things like that that needed clarification. We didn't get a chance to discuss them. They were skipped over. The morning just went through without us even having an opportunity to make a comment virtually. So based on that, I'm afraid I still cannot support the budget, and I'm really disappointed in that because I wanted to this year.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. Even though our budget process is long and we have decided to have many meetings, this year is one of those years where the economy is in flux, revenues are in flux. Revenues were down over $2 million on the OLG, which we didn't get to discuss fully. The final budget is when you get to discuss what, as much as possible, is the most accurate picture of what you're going to be doing the next year. And we received that budget. I received it on December 21st. I looked at it, made questions, and staff scheduled 3 days. But what happened was, when we had the presentation, I asked whether we could discuss the beginning, the asset management plan, you know, where we might be in shortfalls in 2022, which is 1 year away. And we're agreeing to 3-year plans, 10-year capital plans, etc. And we weren't allowed to actually discuss the beginning part of it. We weren't allowed to discuss the mayor's speech, the CAOs, the asset managed plan, the staffing separately, the OLGs. And so it's at the final process. We slotted the times, but it felt rushed. And as Councillor McElwain has said, you know, we didn't really go through the process of looking at it as a final thing. And so I would have liked to have had those. I'm very disappointed in that. The other thing is, which is actually, I'd like to thank the CAO for pointing out all the things that they've had to now change. And that just points out the direction that I try to illustrate for council, that we've had a past experience of closures. And at the time that we discussed this, just basically almost 2 weeks ago, we were going to keep everything open. We were going to, and so I could anticipate that we probably won't, because I know for making my own business plans, and that you have to account for what you have experienced. The first time we didn't know, but this time we should have used that. We should have been able to make bigger cuts to be able to bring this budget down. And that's what my goal was. I think that we should have tried to do that. And so I think that I would have to stay with what I had decided at that meeting. And I'll just say, I really felt that if you slot the 3 days, you have to have a genuine concern that we do it at that last moment when the budget is all together and the most concise data that the staff has been able to pull together, that we can discuss it like that. When you make, this year was one of those years where, you know, like in business, you have this situation where sometimes the market changes very, very quickly, and you have to do things on the fly and make budgets mid term to adjust with it. And I'm used to that. I see that, and I see that this year would have been one of those years where when you make the decision of 1.4 in June to have it like that, well, the situation is different by the end of the year. And for now going forward, we have a second wave. Is there going to be a third wave? There are countries that have third waves. And so you need to be able to make plans like that and make deeper cuts. For myself, in my own business, last year was actually incredibly good because I made the appropriate plans, and we were able to cut costs and to then rehire when the market opened up. And that's the same process that I try to apply to a municipality when I'm at the budget. And so that's what I have to say.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I'm Dan Wilson. I'd like to thank you for the hard work you and Mark put in on this budget, and for all the staff, and particularly the staff who took a 0% increase this year that allowed us to get down as low as we could. I want to also thank you, Dan and Mark, for putting together the bridge levy, the capital levy, and getting that down as well. And I appreciate the fact that we need to maneuver and we need to have the ability to cut costs. But the one thing that we forget about here, and the fact that I know that Councillor Kitchers wanted to talk about the asset management plan. I've spoken to Dan at numerous times about the asset management plan, particularly at AMO and ROMO, where they were giving presentations. Our council was giving presentations to municipalities across the province on our asset management plan. And I know that we're legislated to maintain that asset management plan. And if we'd have cut any deeper on this, unfortunately, I think we would have been faced looking at 2022 and 2023 of a 5 and 6% increase to recuperate the asset management plan. So I was a part of those presentations and listened intently, and I understand where you were coming from, and I appreciate the balance that's in this budget, that as much as we cut as deep as we can, we did not throw the asset management plan out with the bathwater. So I greatly appreciate what staff have done, and I'm in favor of the budget.
Thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. These are challenging and trying times with greater levels of uncertainty than we faced before. Yet I felt that staff produced a meaningful, realistic, and appropriate budget that I was happy to approve. I mean, as we've seen in 2020, where the income wasn't coming in, staff did their best to reduce costs, to put projects on hold. So I trust staff to know where they need to hold back spending, where they need to reduce staff as appropriate. So quite frankly, I trust staff with what they've done to date, and I look forward to their leadership going forward. So, yeah, I can support this budget.
Thanks, Councillor McCrae. Thanks, councillors, for your comments. I'm not going to repeat the things I spoke about on January 5th. I just want to, I do want to repeat my thanks to our staff for again taking a 0% increase, recognizing the challenging times that we live in. Appreciate that. Don't take it for granted. And I also appreciate Mark and Dan walking us through a pretty lengthy process over the last 7 months. I think we pulled together a good budget, and we're still going to continue to get some important work done, provide essential service to our community and our businesses, but yet we're balancing that off with recognizing people's financial hardship right now. So I think we struck the right kind of balance with this budget, and I'm really pleased that we're going to be able to pass this budget. So thanks to staff for all your hard work on this. So I will turn it over to our clerk for a recorded vote. Okay, so I'll read the recommendation that item 5 from the report from the committee as a whole, but the budget dated January 5th, 2021 be approved. And now I'll turn it over to our clerk.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Approve.
Councillor Foster,
No, we should have done better. No.
Councillor McElwain,
No.
Councillor McCray,
Yes.
Councillor Kittrus,
No?
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
Yes.
That does in fact carry.
Okay, moving on to section 10. We have no delegations today. Our first report is the OLG Arts, Culture, and Heritage Funding Allocations for 2021. We have a report from our Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurers, and I'll turn it over to Dan at this point. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is an outstanding item from the budget process. If council recalls, we had a number of organizations speak as delegations to the December pre-budget meeting. The materials supplied during that pre-budget meeting are attached to my report. We have approximately $46,000 that could be potentially allocated from the OLG Arts, Culture, and Heritage Reserve Fund. So I leave it to council to make the decision if some or all of those funds should be allocated to groups for the 2021 year.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. So we have the two options there in front of us. So the first, just to summarize, so the first option then is to identify, we've had two groups come to us asking for funding, and so we can allocate funding to them now as a motion of council, or we can refer this to our 2022 budget process. We have a lot less funds to deal with this year, so I'm open to discussions on how to handle that this year. And I'll just go around the room. It's easier to have a decent discussion that way. Councillor McCray, any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I realize it's been challenging for everyone, and we should try and help the community groups that we can who are also doing their part to help the local community. Reviewing what the Elora Centre for the Arts and the Fergus Scottish Festival were suggesting, I'd be in favor of, say, giving $17,000 to the Elora Centre for the Arts and the remainder, $29,040 to the Fergus Scottish Festival to help them this year with their ongoing projects.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCray. There's one option there. Councillor Dunsmore, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like Councillor McCray's idea. Both these organizations continue to be active in the community even during COVID. I noticed the Elora Centre for the Arts is running art programs for children that are helping out with the mental health crisis in the community. I think they're a valued asset. I think the Fergus Highland Games are carrying on to try and improve things, and there's not going to be a whole lot that they can do this year, but maybe they can get a little bit more done and move further towards their goal, and I think that's a good distribution of the money, so I would just support that.
Councillor Kittrus, your thoughts?
Thank you, Mayor. There were 3 delegations that actually came. We're not discussing the Welly route. The Welly route, it came. I like the idea, but they didn't come with any kind of numbers or budget, and I think they would need help. So maybe next year they could make a presentation. The cultural funds, even though we're low this year, in the future there'll be more and more groups that want to access these funds for projects and what they're doing in the community. And I actually would like the Wellington, the Welly route, the bike route, to make a proposal next year with some sort of substantial budget numbers, but I don't think that they're quite they know how to do that and what it's needed. So I'd like to actually, I'd like to make a motion that something happens with that at this meeting for next year, so that they can be part of this whole process. Now, to get back to the two things, I think that Councillor McCrae's idea is just fine. So I just want to maybe discuss the other thing a little more.
Yeah, I think I'm going to turn it over because I remember during the budget process, we talked a little bit about what we are doing with trails, and I know that a lot of that covers off what the Welly Loop was asking for. So I'm just going to turn it over to our CEO just to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Mayor Linton, through you. Councillor Kitchers, if you recall, we did apply for $300,000 worth of active transportation through the grant that was approved by Council January 5th. So that submission is now in, as well as we've now received that it has been accepted. So we should be hearing on that. Hopefully March, April is the time frame we're hoping to help implement a number of those active transportations. A number of them were also addressing the items raised by John Scott, and I can think of particularly the trail crossing, pedestrian crossing on South River Road was a big ask for as part of his. Our staff will continue to work with John in the Green Lanes and Welly Loop through the year, and I'm sure next year as we continue to work with him, we'll be bringing forward additional work for 2022. Our hope is in his submission together with the group and staff for the 22 budget. So that process will be undertaken with staff and continuing to work with John and his organization.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you. I think it should be split, but I would like to suggest that the Center for the Arts get the $20,000 they asked for. It still leaves $26,000 for the Fergus Scottish Festival, which is, it's unfortunate we don't have enough money that we can cover both the requests, but the Center for the Arts came in with a smaller budget, knowing that we had less money to allocate, and I've only asked for $20,000. I think that's a fair share.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, both suggestions from Councillor McCrae and McElwain are pretty similar. I have no problems with proceeding in some form that way. Is there a reason, Councillor McCrae, why you came up with the calculation for what you suggested, or I'm just curious if there's more information as to why you allocated in that way exactly.
Councillor McCrae?
Well, sort of what I was thinking is there's a notice of motion coming up, I believe, Councillor Van Leeuwen, that you've identified. So I was thinking that if there is a shortfall, that I would probably be using some of my councillor's salary to make up the difference.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. In a past life, I've worked on federal government funding of programs at the federal level, and often we would call these the numbers that I believe the Highland Games asked for 55 and the Arts Center asked for 20, and we would refer to that as the ask. And often there is way more ask than funds available, and I'd like to suggest that we use a arithmetic proportion and give each fund a percentage of what they ask. So to be more specific, correct me if I'm wrong, the Games asked for 55. If we were to use 60% of the ask as a way to make a fair decision, so 60% of 55 would be 33,000 for the Highland Games, and 60% of the 20 would be 12,000. And that way we're we're not really playing favorites. They both came with good proposals. They're both very important groups, and we want to see both of them succeed. And we're simply using an arithmetic formula to give them equal treatment, if you will. In this case, 33 for the Highland Games and 12 for the Arts Center. That's a common practice in government finance. And the remaining 1,000, I'd like to propose. The bike lane idea is a really good one, and I would propose that the remaining $1,000 be allocated for the Welly Loop. And I realize it's nominal dollars, and I would like to see them come back with a more detailed budget next year as well. And I'd like to see something happen on the bike lanes. But this nominal amount of funding, just $1,000, that will pay for some bollards or some lane painting or some signage indicators or even a small marketing initiative to promote cycling tourism. It's a token amount to get started as a sign of goodwill, because I think it's a good project. I don't. Other councillors have also made some very, very good ideas, and I think it's important that we disperse the funds because these are important groups, and I'm open to questions or suggestions, but I think we're on the right track here, and I think we can all come to a good agreement here on what the right course of action is. But those are my thoughts. 60 cents on the dollar with 1,000 left over for the bike lanes.
Councillor McLean?
Thanks, Mayor. That proposal from Councillor Foster is a bit scary for the future, because it'll just have people coming in and asking for $300,000 just because the bigger the number, the higher percentage kind of thing. I think that the fact for the Center for the Arts looked at what we had available and sized their ask appropriately. They should not be penalized for that by getting less than the tourism or than the festival. So I don't like that proposal really very much, Bob. I like, Ian's proposal is, I don't agree with it, but it's certainly better than the 60% proposal.
Okay, thanks. Good discussion. So it sounds pretty clear that we're agreeing on that we want to go with option 1 rather than option 2. So I think that's pretty clear from everybody's discussions. I'm going to turn it now to Councillor McCrae, because I'll give him the opportunity to frame a motion and see, now that he's heard all the comments, if he wants to make any changes. I'll put it to Councillor McCrae to see if he can get a seconder for a motion.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I'd like to propose the motion that $17,000 be awarded to the Elora Centre for the Arts, and the remainder $29,040 goes to the Fergus Scottish Festival.
I have a seconder for that motion, Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thanks very much, Council. Moving on to 11.2, request for tender 4020, and that's the construction of the municipal services on Wellington Road 7. And I'll turn things over to our Corporate Services Director and Treasurer, Dan. Welcome, Dan, again.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is request for tender 40-20, construction of municipal services 6520 and 6523 Wellington Road 7 in Elora. Scope of work is looking at an extension of the sanitary sewer, replacement of undersized water main, new sanitary and water services, utility crossing for future pedestrian signals, road and boulevard restoration, and surface asphalt. The majority of the work is being done for a third party. However, there are portions that are a township responsibility. There were 22 registered plan takers with 6 6 firms submitting a response. Our engineering consultants did review the submissions and are recommending the lowest bid, J. Weber Contracting Limited, at a contract price of $352,821, which includes contingency but excludes HST. The financial analysis shows that the developer contribution is adequate for the payment of the tender results, but the township component is roughly $9,000 over budget. The township portion is 100% funded through development charges, as it is a growth-related capital project. So staff propose award of the contract to J. Weber Contracting Limited at the contract price of $352,821, and that the funding be revised as outlined in my report, which is taking approximately 9,000 additional development charges to fund the overage.
Thank you very much, Dan. So just to confirm, there are no tax dollars being spent on this project.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll read the recommendation, then I'll give councillors the opportunity to speak. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington award request for tender 40-20 regarding the construction of municipal services 6520 and 6523 Wellington Road 7, Elora, to J. Weber Contracting Limited at the contract price of $352,821, including contingency and excluding HST, and that the funding for this project be revised as outlined in report COR 2021-02, dated January 18th, 2021. We have a mover for that recommendation. Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor McCray. Any questions from council on this project? Okay, we'll just go around the room quick. Councillor McCray?
I have no questions.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I have no questions.
Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. Where exactly on? So where I see the numbers, but I'm just wondering where exactly is it in reference to Wellington Road 21? Like, is it just like a few meters lower south of it, or is it like close to where the waterworks is?
Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. Yeah, the site location is just north of the entrance to the Elora wastewater treatment plant. So it's, if you can picture it, it's the where the service entrance to the back of the conservation area is. It's basically from there, and it's maybe, I think it's about 120 feet is going to be the construction area. So, and it's just in front of that property that's currently being developed.
Councillor Kittredge, follow on.
Thank you, Mayor. So how long will the Wellington Road 7 be closed? Like, what's the time for this project?
Yeah.
Yeah, Colin?
Yeah, through Mayor Linton. So we're looking at an early spring construction, and so this does include some water main. So we do need to get the water main disinfected and tested. So it'll probably be a 2-week closure, and the detour route will be through 8th line. So kind of Wellington Road 18 to 8th line, and then 8th line to 21. So about a 2-week closure to get this work done. So.
Councillor McElwain? Councillor Van Leeuwen?
I have no questions.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Question, Colin. This is adjacent to the Lawrence wastewater treatment plant, as I understand, and up the road a little bit. Can you help me understand if why this work wasn't done at the time when we did the plant? Is it wholly separate from there, or just can you just help me understand why it may not have been done at the time we redid the plant? It's relatively close there too.
Through Mayor Linton. So yeah, I think it's at that time we weren't really envisioning that parcel to be being developed, and also it becomes a funding. This is primarily developer driven, and therefore it's what we call a local service. So it's developer funded as well. So between those two factors, we didn't really envision that development occurring, and the fact that it was being developer funded basically played into the decision not to do the servicing at that time. But that was back in 2013 when the plan was expanded.
Okay, call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to 11.3, concurrence request proposed ExploreNet Tower on 7th line in former West Garifraxa, and I'll turn it over to Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is another communication tower proposed by ExploreNet Communications. It's at 6708 7th line in former West Garifraxa. It's a farm property. They're proposing a 45-meter tall tower. It's to replace existing equipment that's on one of the silos on that farm. The applicant or the representative of ExploreNet is a company called Forbes Brothers. Their information package that went out to the neighbors is attached. They initiated that consultation on November 12th. Sarah Duncan, who's a representative of Forbes Brothers, is on the call in case there's any questions for her. But there were no significant comments or objections from the neighboring residents during the circulation. So the next step is to ask the municipality for a concurrence letter. We've done, I think, 2 other ones earlier this year, and this is another case where I'm recommending that council indicates that it has no objection and then authorizes me to do that concurrence letter. But as I said, Sarah Duncan is on the call in case you have any questions specifically for her.
Great, thanks, Brett. I'm going to get the recommendation on the floor, and then I'll turn it over for questions, comments from council. Recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington hereby resolves that it has no objection to the proposed telecommunications tower by ExploreNet Communications at 6708 7th line, former Township of West Garifraxa, and that the Managing Director of Planning and Development be authorized to provide a municipal concurrence letter. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Foster. Any discussions from council? All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to 11.4, it looks sort of familiar. Anything that you want to add to this, Brett?
No, thanks, Mayor Linton. This is another one that's on another one of our 7th lines. This is 7th line in the former Township of Aramasa, in a little area that's known as Shiloh. It's basically the same circumstance. However, it's they have existing equipment on a silo on the farm there. And in order to improve the coverage, they're seeking to replace that with another 45-meter tall tower under similar circumstances. This one started a little later. The public consultation was initiated on November 26th, and the notice period ended on January 4th. They didn't receive any objections. There was a comment received about the health impact of these kind of communication devices, which was answered by the applicant that they comply with the Health Canada regulations. So again, the same recommendation that you're authorizing me to do the concurrence letter.
Great, thanks very much, Brett. I'll get this recommendation on the floor. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington hereby resolves that it has no objection to the proposed telecommunications tower by ExploreNet Communications at 5976 7th line, former Township of Aramasa, and that the Managing Director of Planning and Development be authorized to provide a municipal concurrence letter. Can I get a mover for that recommendation, please? Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. Any questions, comments from members of council? All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to 11.5, Environmental Registry, number 019-2017, proposed implementation of updates to Ontario's water quantity management framework. And I will turn it over to our risk management official, Kyle Davies. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Mayor Linton, members of council, I'm pleased to be here today to provide you with an update on the Environmental Registry Proposal 019-2017. If you would recall that this is the third ERO posting, Environmental Registry of Ontario posting that the province has done in about the last 6 or 7 months. And it is, they are all generally, well, not generally, they are all related to the expiry of the water bottle moratorium that is scheduled at this point on April 1st, 2021. So the purpose of today's report is to provide council the opportunity to review, consider, and provide comment on the most recent regulatory proposal. And this proposal is related to changes, this proposal is related to proposed changes about priority of use, area management of stressed areas, data publication and revocation of the interim water bottling technical guidance. If council would remember, the very first posting back in June was the Ontario Water Quantity Framework, and this provided 4 goals, goals 1, 2, 3, and 4 that are listed in your report. So establishing clear provincial priorities of water use, updating the approach to managing water takings in stressed areas, managing water, make water taking data more accessible, and giving host municipalities more input into water bottling decisions. This posting deals with and provides draft guidance to deal with goals 1, 2, and 3, and of course goal 4 was the subject of one of the more recent postings back to October and November around the host municipal input into water bottling. Also at that time, just to note for council, the previous posting in the fall also dealt with notifications under the environmental activity and sector registry requirements. And just as a brief update to council on that, that regulation has not been brought into force yet by the province. The intent for that is for that to come in to force at some point, and it would be posted on the ERO at some point in this winter. So that would be in place by April 1st. And just as a reminder, this would mean that pumping tests would be subject to EASR or environmental activity and sector registry requirements, and therefore not subject to permits to take water, and that there's less of a notification process with that. However, those were some of the comments that the ministry is considering right now, and we are waiting at this point to see what their decisions will be in terms of the comments on the previous posting. So moving to the current posting, what we have in front of you is a summary of what the posting entails, and the intent really, given the timing of when the province has posted this, was to get this in front of council for council's consideration and council's comment. But you'll note that our comments are fairly initial and draft at this point. And that's because we have up until February 5th to provide comments. However, given council schedules, we wanted to make sure we got this on your agenda in January. So the proposed amendments to both the regulation and the guidance document in this posting provides the legal language necessary to implement goals 1, 2, and 3. That would be in the regulation. And then the guidance document outlines at a high level how the province intends or is proposing to implement the area management guidance and the priority of use guidance. So of interest to council, really both aspects of those guidance. The first one is, of course, the area management. And the province has left the criteria fairly general and fairly high level. So for instance, it's not clear whether a WPQ, a well protection area quantity, would automatically be considered a stressed area. In fact, ministry staff have kind of indicated that it wouldn't be, that instead it would be one of the criteria that they would consider. And the reason they've done this is to keep the criteria broader, that it can be applied to a variety of different scenarios, both groundwater scenarios, but also surface water scenarios. And then the proposed guidance document also provides details on the implementation of priorities of use. The guidance document is very clear that drinking water includes all types of drinking water systems, so municipal as well as private domestic wells and as well as non-municipal residential communal water supplies. And it makes it clear that all uses within a priority use category are treated equally. So drinking water, environment, and livestock watering are all category 1 uses. And in the event of a conflict, they are all treated equally, and the ministry will have to sort out between them how best to divvy up the resource. With category 2 and category 3, category 2 is other farm uses, other agricultural uses. Category 3 is the industrial commercial use, and category 4 is the aesthetic use. And the province was very clear that the priority of use framework is meant as a tool of last resort, and it doesn't supersede the current existing framework in Ontario of first in time, first in right, and fair sharing, and no interference. So overall, with the initial draft comments, you'll see that staff are generally supportive of these ideas. These both will advance the implementation of the water quantity framework, protect the overall water resource, and integrate well with existing programs such as source water. This is enabling legislation and guidance, so it's not prescriptive. So it will be up to the discretion of the Ministry Environment Director. In our case here, it would be Dan Dobrin at West Central, in consultation with all stakeholders to determine when to implement either area management and or priority use. And that is a key component of the guidance document, is that there is quite a bit of consultation laid out. Not all the details are laid out, but there is a process laid out for the ministry, and an expectation that the ministry would be not only consulting with municipalities, but also conservation authorities, Indigenous groups, and other stakeholders. So there's a few other comments here laid out for Council's consideration, and we'd be happy to take questions and comments for inclusion in the written comments due on February 5th. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kyle. And I see that we have a recommendation to receive this as information. So I am going to get this recommendation on the table. Then I'll go around the council for comments. So I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington receive as information report number IS 2021-01 dated January 18th, 2021 regarding environmental registry number 019-2017 proposed implementation of updates to Ontario's water quantity management framework. I have a mover for that recommendation to get on the floor. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. Any comments, questions from members of council? Okay, I'll go around the room. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you to Kyle. Kyle, one thing I'm curious about reading the document is which category of use does bottled water fall under? I would have thought the government might have specifically mentioned it, seeing how popular a topic it is.
Thank you, Councillor McCrae. Through Mayor Linton, it would be in category 3. It would be a category 3 use.
Councillor Dunsmore?
No, thank you, Kyle. It was a very thorough report. I appreciate your efforts. No questions.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I just would like, in simple words, what exactly is the municipality's powers and abilities to not have water bottling in our municipality? We've made motions towards the government about this. This document is outlining, and so I guess partly I'd like to know from Colin exactly what this does, and maybe Andy, and maybe they could clarify just in simple terms.
Colin or Kyle, I want you to get who is the best one to answer this?
I don't know. Kyle, do you want to start, and then I'll weigh in after, if that's all right?
Sure. Yep, absolutely. Through you, Mayor Linton. Councillor Kittrus, in terms of water bottling, the host municipality council resolution, so the second group of postings that I mentioned in the report, that came to council in the fall and were passed into legislation by the province just before Christmas, does give, so that is changes to the regulation under the Ontario Water Resources Act that allows municipal councils to, well, actually requires municipal councils to weigh in on bottled water applications within their municipality. However, and there is a big caveat with that, it is for takings that are greater than 379,000 liters per day. And that was a comment that we made to the province when that was open for posting, and it was a comment that they chose not to act on. So the threshold of 379,000 liters a day is the threshold where a municipal council resolution is required. So if there is a bottled water taking that is less than that threshold, then those regulatory changes don't apply. So then you're back to the tools that you mentioned, Councillor Kittredge, of resolutions and motions and letters to the minister and things of that nature.
But Kyle, that's not part of this submission to the province, is it? That we're talking about on the agenda today?
Yeah, thank you, Merlin. No, it's part in the sense that they all form pieces. So the summer posting outlined the overall strategy. The fall postings dealt with goal 4, and now this posting deals with goal 1, 2, and 3. So it's part in that. It's part of it in that sense. But you're correct. That's not actually part of the current posting that's in front of us at this point.
Mr. McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. Kyle, Council was copied on an email you received or comments you received from Save Our Water concerning the use or the restrictions or lack of restrictions around testing, well testing. And I don't see that in your comments, so I'm just curious, would you be, well, I guess number one, do you agree? But number two, would you be potentially adding those comments to yours?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McElwain. Through you, Marilyn. Yes, I did receive that email from Save Our Water. I just actually replied after lunch today. We could receive that email at the end of last week. So the comments, and that was my intention in trying to reference about the EASER, or the Environmental Activity and Site Registry posting in my kind of preamble today. That was actually comments. We made comments on that notification, and what the concern was raised for everyone. The concern that was raised was that there seems to be a lack of notification process built into the pumping test requirements for any pump test, actually, but obviously bottled water is of concern. So that was the posting that closed in November. We did provide comments on that came to council in the fall. We did provide kind of 3 points specifically around notification, or where we could see, wasn't there was a lack of notification, but there where they could have beefed up the notification process. That is a posting that the province has not made a decision on yet. So what we've been told is that they'll be making a decision on that prior to April 1st of 2021, and it would be posted as a decision note through the Environmental Registry. So at this point, we don't know what the province's decision is going to be, whether they will take those comments into consideration and change the notification process, or whether they'll go with what they were proposed in the fall. So yes, aware of those comments, aware of those concerns, had similar concerns, made those comments to the province before the closing in November, and are waiting for what the province's decision will be on that. But again, that's not actually related to the posting that we're talking about today. It's related in the sense that it's an earlier posting that forms one package, but it's not what's open for comment currently.
Mr. Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Kyle, as well, for a very excellent report. Kyle, I'm wondering, can you tell me, what would be the single most important thing with your report and what we've been talking about here for the public? What's one or two things that, bullet point things that the public should take note of here? And those same things that we should take to the public about this matter?
Thank you, Councillor Foster, and through you, Mayor Linton. It would be three things, and it would actually be lined up with the goals that this posting's trying to achieve. So the first would be that the province is proposing, for the first time, a way to manage stressed areas, whether they be groundwater or surface water, in a cumulative way, an accumulative effects way. So that is groundbreaking. The province would argue that they've always had that ability to do that, and they have done that in past. But this is noteworthy. This is something that they're laying out as a process that will be in effect and that will have a public consultation component to it. So whether that's here in Centre Wellington, whether that's in South Wellington, whether that's in Northern Ontario, there's going to be a process through the Ministry of Environment for consultation and for managing stressed areas, the management of water in stressed areas, whether that's groundwater or surface water. So that'd be the first one. The second is that they have laid out priorities of use. So again, the province will argue, and will correctly argue, that the priorities of use have always been inherent in the legislation. But there's a big difference between inherent and explicit, and they're making the priorities of use explicit now. So that's a big difference too, and that's those four categories. And I think a big takeaway is that drinking water, whether it is a private well or whether it's a municipal well or whether it's a communal system, has equal priority. And then on top of that, it also has equal priority with livestock watering and for an ecosystem function. So those are sustenance of life is the first category and the first priority. So that'd be the second takeaway. And the third takeaway is, and it's actually the point in the report, Councillor Foster, that they probably have the least amount of detail on, is that they're making regulatory changes, and it's in the legislative changes, to make data more accessible. What that looks like, we don't know. And we'll have to wait and see, but they are making strides towards more open data in terms of water. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks for that summary, Kyle. That helps a lot. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just realized on page 55 of 82 of our agenda, sort of paragraph number 2, there's a comment there. Council may wish to consider whether engineering staff or the township hydrologist should review the revocation of the interim water bottling guidance to ensure that the revocation does not remove requirements that are beneficial to the township and its water management. So I take it, Kyle, you're looking for some sort of direction from council as to whether or not we would like engineering staff or our hydrologist to say yes, look into it?
Yes, thank you, Councillor McCrae, through you, Mayor Linton. Yes, this is a report I'm taking to a number of councils, and it's really just a flag to say that you know, although I'll be providing comments in a certain area, the technical comments are really outside of my expertise. So if that's something council feels is necessary, then I wanted to flag that for your consideration to determine whether or not you would like that review done as well.
I personally would certainly like to have that done, probably by the township hydrologist, but it's up to the rest of council what they think.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. In my initial question, Kyle answered some of it, but I asked Colin kind of what exactly that would mean for us, and I agree with Councillor McCrae that what is this municipality going to do, like, concerning this? Like, are we putting comments in, or what are we doing? So I would still like Colin to kind of answer that part of it.
So I just don't want to go past Councillor McCrae's request there. So what you know, and if what he was getting at is something that was in the document that has our hydrologist look at this. So if we want to direct our staff to do that, I guess we have to do that. So I just don't want to lose that. There's action that has to be taken, so this isn't just a discussion point. Councillor McCrae?
Should I put it forward as a notice of motion?
just as a motion, because it is related to this.
Okay, then I'd like to propose that council asks our township hydrologist to review the revocation of the interim water bottling guidance to ensure that the revocation does not remove requirements that are beneficial to the township and its water management.
We have a seconder for that motion, Councillor Dunsmore. Any discussion on that point? And I just want to be clear, the reason I'm allowing this motion to go forward right now is because everybody's had the opportunity to speak. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure everybody's clear on why I'm allowing this motion to go ahead right now. So we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. So that's one thing that was asked for in this report besides just receiving for information. So that's clear. So now, sorry, Councillor Kittredge, I'll go back to the question that you had. And who's in the right position to answer that? Probably Colin, right? Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. So just to clarify, you're looking for what the township, what activities we're doing to I guess prevent water bottling within the township. So yeah, and again, like we've discussed, you know, the province does oversee permits to take water for water bottling. As Kyle did mention, there was a veto provisions in the last ERO posting, and you know, we did provide comments. We thought the threshold for municipal veto was way too high. That I believe 379,000 liters per day seems very high from our perspective. We thought it should be closer to maybe around the 50,000 liters per day, which would trigger that municipal support or endorsement of the taking. But unfortunately, the province didn't agree with that. The 379, just for reference, I believe it's a Great Lakes, some threshold to deal with the Great Lakes that we didn't really feel was appropriate in a groundwater system. So we did provide those comments. Unfortunately, the ministry has decided to go a different direction, but in terms of notification and consultation and the process that water bottles will need to go through, you know, that's a little more clear now for in terms of the proponent and municipalities. So the rules of the game are being much more clear. I don't know, Kyle, if you have anything else to add to that.
I would probably just add that the proposal that's in this report about the area management would also, if enacted, would also provide a process, another process for council and for municipalities to be involved, because if an area is identified as a stressed area, then there is a consultation process that's required and a data analysis process that's required. So as I mentioned in my remarks, the province has not committed to a WPQ being an automatic trigger for an area management strategy, but they have indicated it's certainly one of the factors. So we do have a WPQ here, or will. The public consultation actually starts on January 25th for the wellhead protection area quantity for Centre Wellington next week. And there will be some public meetings on that in February. But I would just mention, Colin, that if the area management comes into effect, then that would be another way for consultation and municipal input.
Yeah, sorry, Council, I'm going to have to apologize. I did make a mistake. We had another motion on the floor, and I should have asked to make an amendment to the motion that we had on the floor to add Councillor McCrae's motion, and I didn't do that, so I've been slapped by our clerk, just to let you know. So we do have a main motion on the floor. I'm going to ask the mover and their seconder if they're still okay to move and second that original motion. And that is just to receive this report for information. Who did we get to move and second that? So Councillor Dunsmore moved it, Councillor McCrae seconded it. Are you guys still okay to move and second that?
Well, we moved and seconded Ian's motion ourselves as well, so I think we're okay with it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of that recommendation to receive this as information? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Sorry for messing up the process there, councillors. Thanks very much, Kyle, for your good work on this, and I'm sure the other members of the other member municipalities will go through a similar process. Too bad you just can't cut and paste your comments to every council you go to.
Thank you, Mayor Litton.
Yeah, thank you. No information items. We'll have our bylaws. We have a recommendation that bylaws 2021-01 through 2021-03 be read a first, second, and third time and passed and signed by the mayor and clerk and the corporate seal affixed. Have a mover for the bylaws, please. Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor of those bylaws? Opposed? And that carries. We have section 14 on. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get into the rest of our agenda here, starting with a notice of motion on 14. So let's come back here at about 3:16, 3:17. Okay, welcome back. We'll get back at it here. I think we're all here. Yeah, I got to look through my Brady Bunch squares here to make sure, because everybody's moved around again. Okay, we're good. So we have a notice of motion from Councillor McCrae that will be talked about in a meeting in February, so that's just there for your notice. So we have 3 proposed motions on the floor. The first one is a proposed motion from Councillor Van Leeuwen, and I will turn it over to Councillor Van Leeuwen to introduce his motion, and then we will provide an opportunity to go around the room for council discussion and questions. Yeah, and just remember, Councillor Van Leeuwen, after you introduce your motion, you'll need a seconder to get that on the floor. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, my motion today that I've got presented, it's something that kind of sits close to my heart, something that obviously we see the community struggling, and knowing that I do believe that every one of us sitting on council cares for the community. That's why we're there. What we realize is that we have a community that's hurting, a community that is also struggling in their jobs, and in many ways we want to help. And as public servants, we also have a bit of stability in what we're doing, especially in regards to financially. So the essence behind this is that we care for the community, and that we find ways to invest, and I like the word invest, into the community in different ways. So this is the way I wanted to meet our strategic plan as well. So I'd like to just read the motion and then possibly look for a seconder. So whereas the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions continue to affect Canadian residents, and whereas we acknowledge the financial, emotional, spiritual, and mental health or effect of public health restrictions on Centre Wellington residents, and whereas the draft Centre Wellington Township budget for 2021 is currently under review for final approval in January 2021, and whereas we, the members of council, understand the hardships that the residents of Centre Wellington are going through and are willing to lead by example, and whereas we acknowledge the writings on the Peace Tower of the Canadian Parliament building from Proverbs 29 verse 18, where there is no vision, the people perish. And whereas the Township Strategic Plan seeks to promote active and caring community, particularly in regards to supporting the caring organizations within the community. And whereas the Township Strategic Plan seeks to promote good financial management in the face of increased demand for township community grants to charities and nonprofits without increasing the tax burden on residents. Therefore, as a municipal councillor, I'll be donating a portion of my 2021 publicly funded council wages to local charities and nonprofit organizations to offset the increased demand for assistance within our community. And further, encourage the mayor, councillors, and public sector employees to donate a portion of their municipal salary or time to a local charity and nonprofit of their choice. And further, that this motion be forwarded to the province of Ontario, area, counties, and municipalities as a further encouragement in joining this leadership effort to invest in their communities due to the effects of COVID-19 and its restrictive effects on the residents. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen, for moving that. We have a seconder for this, Councillor McCray. And any discussion from council? I'll go around the room and we'll start with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen, for a very interesting motion. And I applaud and appreciate what you're trying to do there. Steve, I do appreciate what you're trying to accomplish, but I note that we just had and you acknowledged, I think, that people are hurting, and I think I heard you say struggling in their jobs. And Steve, I hate to ask you this, but I'm going to have to ask you this, which is, you just voted a tax increase, even though you acknowledge people are struggling in their jobs. Can you help me understand why you would vote for a tax increase and then propose a salary donation because people are hurting? Because those things are, quite frankly, a little bit contradictory.
So just a little bit about the process here. We're going to go around the room, and I know Steve got that question. He'll answer it when I'll give him the opportunity after everybody has an opportunity to speak to respond to any questions or concerns that are raised. So that's the process that we'll take. Anything else that you wanted to add to that, Councillor Foster?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The only thing that I would like to add is I personally do a number of charitable donations and have done most of my life, as well as volunteering of time as well. And I also, Steve, would encourage everyone to do that as they're able and as both financially and as their time permits. It's a very rewarding thing, and it is very much needed. I've been doing that most of my life.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you, Mayor. In principle, I certainly agree with what Stephen has brought forward. But kind of as Councillor Foster has spoken, I think most of us are already, I mean, I certainly know from my own time with Sensational Laura and Monster Month and the number of dollars I donate through that every year. I feel that I'm doing what Stephen is requesting already and have been for as long as I can remember. And so trying to formalize it to me it doesn't buy me a whole, it isn't something I think is necessarily formalized, I guess is the point. You're either doing it or you're not doing it, and having anything as a motion doesn't really show me a lot of anything new. But as I say, I certainly appreciate and support the concept.
Thanks, Councillor McElwain. Councillor Kitchis?
Thank you, Mayor. I support this. I make contributions, charitable contributions with my monies. I think that as councillors, it's a good example. I do agree with Councillor Foster about, when you have a budget, that also affects people. So I don't think that diminishes really this extra contribution. It has inspired me to do something also, so that's sort of where I stand for this.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, Stephen, I appreciate your motion. I thank you for bringing it forward. It's just kind of a formalization of what a lot of us do. I spend a lot of time and donate a lot of my time for charity organizations, either emceeing their events or helping them fundraise. You're all aware of the walk I took this year for mental health. I do what I can with what I have. And, you know, your motion kind of formalizes that and pushes it up to other levels of government. So I'm in favor.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen, for bringing this forward. I see it as another opportunity, besides being a councillor, to give back to the community, so I certainly support this.
Thanks, Councillor McCray. And I'll just, you know, I definitely appreciate the heart of this motion. It does, I know it comes from Councillor Van Leeuwen's concern about our community and the tough time that communities are having right now. I don't necessarily think it requires a motion, but I understand what Councillor Van Leeuwen is trying to do. I know that, as Councillor Dunsmore talked about, he raised almost $30,000 this year for the Cody Shepherd Project in mental health, and that was done regardless of whether we have this motion in place or not. But if it is going to help encourage more individuals, councillors, and members of staff to donate, then I see it as a positive thing. Councillor Van Leeuwen, do you want to speak to any of the comments that you heard?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I think that the intent was to inspire others to whether continue or to take on a new motivation this year, considering the fact that yeah, we definitely have gone through some struggles, and leadership, sometimes you don't lead from the closet, but you have to get out there and be in the face of the public, and sometimes that means we need to speak about it. I do recognize Councillor Dunsmore's walk, and I look at how that inspiring that is as well. And that's why it doesn't speak to a dollar amount, because every one of us has different talents and different funds to give. And so I think that it's something that we want to inspire each other to invest in and work to build the community. In regards to Councillor Foster's question, I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to see us increase grants this year or increase other donation areas because of the difficulties that's happening on top of the already 1.3% increase. Because we do have capital projects, we do have all this, I'll say the business of the township to continue to work on. And in order to not do that and to find ways outside of the tax revenue, that is the real thrust of what I'm looking for, is to say, how can we inspire not only ourselves but public sector employees and those with secure jobs to do something this way. Thanks.
Okay, I'll call for the vote. So we have a mover and a seconder. All in favor of this motion? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much, Council. Moving on to Councillor Kittrus's motion. The first one is the neighborhood wellness motion, and I will turn things over to Councillor Kittrus, and we'll go through a very similar process as what we just went through. Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Mayor. I was sort of inspired by Councillor Van Leeuwen's idea of contributing. And one of the reasons 6 years ago I sort of actually ran was because I had experience with neighbors and community when my wife died, and it was a profound and touching experience. Myself, I basically am a workaholic, so I just work, and but my wife was very engaged in neighborhood, in schools and community groups and sports events, and I benefited from those engagements, and so it was like a very natural and organic intermediary process of volunteers, and it always struck me that that this was just, it wasn't a government way of doing things, but at the same time, like, you don't know and realize that your neighbors are very helpful. My family's kind of far away, so you know they weren't very close to support people, and it was in terms of mental health, it helped me a lot to know that people contributed, and it was really largely on the social capital, I guess, that my wife's engagement had done in the community. And so I thought that, you know, in our society, in our community, you know, churches used to be a focus of this kind of activity where you made connections and had supports and things like that. But, you know, there's a radical decline in that in communities. You can see it because churches are for sale almost everywhere when you drive in the country. And I thought that generally, you know, this whole process of us, you know, we consider a lot of assets, we consider a lot of, you know, heritage buildings, but generally, we are trying to make our community better by everything that we do. But at the same time, and we've had things in our strategic plans about mental health, small town feeling. And so I thought that this might be a good project to initiate with the community to figure out how we could enhance this, you know, hospitality and neighborhoods, and I sort of my own committees. I mean, I've been on farm safety for 6 years, social housing for 6 years. They're more county things, and I don't really have anything really in the communities. So I thought that this might be a really good project to maybe engage and just with if staff forms a task force, and then when this COVID thing, you know, like eventually it will like decline, and then we can form some way of facilitating this. Our communities are growing rapidly, and there's intensification, and so different areas of neighborhoods, like people often say, oh, it's just moving too fast, it's too much. And I think that you know, enhancing a small town feeling is I think that when my wife died over 20 years ago, it was more of a small town here, and you know, it was where people did that kind of thing. But you know, because I've lived in cities, that people, they don't engage as much. There's more of a disconnect. And so I think that this would help fulfill some of our strategic plans, and it'd be a good project for the community. So I'd like to read it. Whereas isolation, alienation, loneliness are major causes of mental health issues in society and municipalities, and whereas when the community is changing rapidly through growth of subdivisions and intensifications of neighborhoods, there is isolation and estrangement from your surroundings and neighborhood. And whereas we on council can acknowledge that the pandemic 2020 and the public health restriction mandates experienced and currently in effect have affected the financial, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being of members of our community, because the social distancing, mask wearing, social limiting activities outside of your social bubble, employment, and there's employment loss and business closures. And whereas mental wellness is vital also for farm communities, not just urban environments, and whereas the Municipal Act, Section 224A and B reads, it is the role of council, 1A, to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality, and B, to develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality. And whereas the Municipality of Centre Wellington Strategic Plan 2018-22 seeks to improve an active and caring community, in particular to support the caring organizations within the community and prioritize mental health as part of our safe community. Now, therefore, the Council of Centre Wellington should form a community well-being and neighborhood hospitality task force of 2 councillors and 6 citizens chosen by staff for the purpose of enhancing the mental and emotional health of our community through building neighborhood networks of social interaction. I would like to donate 25% of my 2021 wages towards the material costs of funding the startup promotional materials to establish this program. And further, as I would like to sit on this task force for the remaining of the term. And that's sort of basically what I'd like to say.
Thanks, Councillor Kittredge, for moving that motion. Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor McElwain. Then I'll turn it over to Council for discussion. Again, I'll let Councillor Kittredge respond to anything after we're all done commenting. Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I guess, Councillor Kittredge, my concern is, are we duplicating efforts already occurring in the community? We have various neighborhood groups such as Aurora Meadows, church initiatives involving men's and women's groups, community gardens. We have service groups like Big Sisters, Big Brothers, social justice, and other groups like the Aurora Center for the Arts engaging community members. The community, from my opinion, seems to be fairly resourceful to this point in establishing connections. So I wonder, does it really need local government assistance?
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah,
Sorry, Councillor McCray, were you finished? Because unless you're finished your comments, I'm going to allow Councillor Kittredge to respond to everything at the tail end. So I just didn't want to cut you off if you had anything more.
The only other thing I had as well was sort of to know more about the terms of reference and selection criteria for committee members.
Thanks, Councillor McCray. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments about duplication of effort. Councillor Kittredge, this is a great idea. I'm sitting on the CSAC committee now looking at grants coming forward for numerous organizations whose goal and job it is to connect our community and focus on our community's well-being, and that's what these community grants are for. And so that's what we're doing with that now. From a mental health standpoint, I used to have a concept of the more the merrier, but having been involved in it, I've reached out to the Canadian Mental Health Association, had a quick chat with them. The only concerns that I heard from a few of those was the Safe Communities Committee that you sit on. They're kind of the overarching for the county. Now, I understand that they're with the county and they don't come down here. I just worry about there being too many things and then people get, you're looking all over the community to see where things are going. So I need more definition in your terms of reference, and I'd be more than happy to support this. But I do have one major concern, and it comes from the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And I know it's out of an abundance of a desire to be helpful, Councillor Kittredge, that you have put this motion in, you have offered to fund it, and you want to sit on it. But that is the very definition of a pecuniary conflict of interest. You're paying to start a committee, and you're asking to sit on it. So at the very least, if I was to support this, you may very well end up being on the committee. But if you're paying to start the committee up and then you're demanding a seat on the committee, that to me is the very definition of a pecuniary conflict of interest.
Thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor Mack?
Thanks, Mayor. I guess my comments are, number one, I think it's very appropriate that this is happening today, which is classified as Blue Monday. So, and with mental health being kind of the focus of Blue Monday, it's a good time to bring this forward. In concept, I think this is a great motion. I don't disagree with some comments from Councillor Dunmore in particular about, I guess both having to do with the terms of reference and funding, et cetera. I think that could be possibly tightened up a little bit. As far as having a lot of groups in the community already, perhaps the basic terms of reference of this community well-being and neighborhood hospitality task force could be to centralize kind of the umbrella of a lot of these other groups, and with it being a municipal committee, it would have that ability to bring everything together much more recognizable for those who need it. So I support the idea of the task force. I don't know that the terms as they're laid out are how it should finally look. So that's my only comment.
Thanks, Councillor McElwain. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, reading through this, I like the idea and the concept for sure, and actually was when I read it, I'm like, oh, that would be an exciting thing to sit on the committee and be active in the community in that way, and then to realize, as I kind of pondered it more and also listening to councillors, that the idea of having so many groups and also having government get involved to try to manage all this, possibly it's better that I could probably say lack of time being on council as well. It's probably better to have the actual charities and those who are involved in it already to do this work. I would be interested for sure to hear some more understanding of a committee that brings it all together or something, but I'm not sure in the way that it's written today that I could support it, but I love what it's looking to do for our community for sure. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, you did call me. There's a little garble there right when you pronounced my name. I believe you did call me.
I did, yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's just a little technical audio glitch. Thank you, Mayor. Just speaking last, I've been listening closely to all the various comments, lots of good ones. Stephen, I'd like to thank you for bringing forward this motion. I think it's a good one. I agree with Councillor McElwain. This could be a potential umbrella or a unifier or a coordinator, and I like the fact that it be focused specifically on Centre Wellington. So I do think it has a lot of merit. Terms of reference maybe can be finalized or detailed and more particularly. That's something that could happen. Finally, I want to speak to Councillor Dunsmore's comments. Steve, I don't believe you would be in conflict of interest because you would not accrue a pecuniary benefit directly to yourself. So I don't see a conflict of interest there. That's something that needs to take a look. We could take a look at, but I'm sorry, Neil. I don't see how there can be a conflict when there's no direct pecuniary benefit to sitting on the committee. I do note in the Conflict of Interest Act, the pay we receive for committee work is exempt and not considered in the terms of the conflict of interest legislation. So if you're speaking about the pay you receive for sitting on a committee, it's directly exempt from the legislation and declared not to be in conflict. So those are some of my comments. I'd like to speak in favor of the motion. I think it could be a good one with some refinement, and thank you.
Yeah, just a couple comments for myself. Absolutely appreciate the passion behind this motion and a similar heart behind this one that was behind Councillor Van Leeuwen's motion. A couple thoughts that I have. I don't from the wording of this motion right now. I don't really know what this committee will do. I think there needs to be a little more work done on what this committee is about, because it talks about growth of subdivisions, it talks about public health restrictions, it talks about farm communities, building neighborhood networks, so a lot of really good things. I don't understand how it's going to work, and I also don't understand how that's the role of government. I really don't think government is great at playing this role. No slight to all of us here, but I do feel like this is more of a committee group, a community committee group. So I have a little bit of a challenge with that. If there is a way that we could kind of clarify the terms in this motion, I'd be much more apt to vote in favor of it, because I don't really know what it is about, and I'm a little bit leery about how much work staff is going to have to do to put this together without clear direction. So I wouldn't vote in favor of this right now because I don't think it's clear enough. I really do have a significant issue with the and further points, donating 25% of 2021 wages, and I would like to sit on it. I think either one of those is fine, but the two together is where I have an issue, because it seems like the two are connected. So that's some of the challenges I have. I wish we could have a little bit more defined definition to this, and then maybe I would vote differently. But as it is right now, I don't know what I'm voting in favor of, because it's a little too broad. So those are my thoughts, and I'll turn it to Councillor Kittredge for your responses. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to respond to the comments and try to get a little bit of clarification. I also would like to, if there is a feeling that the clarifications that I'm trying to give right now are not sufficient, I would defer this to some other time. But I'd like to address those concerns first. So, first of all, I don't want a permanent committee. I want a task force. It's a one-time task force. It's about starting something that's very grassroots of people where they are in their place. They live in a house. They have neighbors. They are in a certain area of the municipality, and there are changes, because when there's new subdivisions, everybody's new. But when there's intensification, it's very new. And because what it is I don't want this to be a funding thing for every year. Actually, it's a one-time thing. You create a document that allows people and inspires people to connect in place, in their neighborhoods. That it would be kind of different to just create like a more of a committee. I don't want that. I want to sort of inspire people, and it comes from different literature and understanding of how communities are helped. There's a fellow named Bob Woodson in the United States, and basically he's developed and written on neighborhood engagement, neighborhood empowerment, and so what it is it's just people meeting each other and doing things like street parties and cooking class, sharing recipes. It's ordinary stuff that connects people. But I think the literature that I've read about the internet and just stuff, people are losing actually the ability to have conversations face to face, because there's a specialist, Shirley tickled that she is called into schools because kids are missing a way of communicating to each other. And I think that my experience, like I've lived in different cities, and people, when you go too far, and people get so disengaged and not. We have a great community, but it's about where you get your volunteers is when you get them engaged on a very simple level when they're newcomers. And it's some newcomers, they were engaged in their previous homes. A lot of people are not. They just are transient and they're not connected. So basically, for Councillor McCrae, I would agree that perhaps I should have better terms of reference of exactly what it is. I don't think it's a duplication though, because I want it to be in place on, I think of, let's say, my ward, just in the urban area, there's probably 8 or 9 neighborhoods like that. If you get more and more intensification, if you get more let's say in my rural area where I live, there's only three people on the road. But it's a neighborhood in a sense. I mean, if I extend the road farther, I know some of the people, but not really. I only know the 3 people that are on my road. And we actually, we know each other. We look out for their property. I'm rural, okay? So that's different. And the other thing about conflict, basically the task force is just to start it, is to just get people thinking like this. What are the tools that neighborhood and ordinary people can engage in easily? And it gives them ideas of how they can, start street parties and after the engagement with the citizens and the ideas that come up, then they would present staff with something and they could make it as a one-time document like you see in, before when we went to the office or the main center in Elora, you'd pick up a brochure or something like that, and it would have something about this, or on the website, or you could see it. You could see, oh, geez, I'd like to start one of these neighborhoods. And once you get the tool there that the municipality has, the citizens will just create it themselves. And I know people say, many of us are really engaged in the community. I mean, I have different groups I'm in, but a lot of people are not. Okay, it's just a fact that there's not. And all the volunteer organizations I know of, they're struggling getting volunteers. So this is really a grassroots, ordinary. Once they maybe meet somebody you have to meet other people that are volunteering to volunteer. It's almost because that's how it was for me. And so that's sort of the idea that I have about this. In terms of I'm just donating the money because after it's all done, maybe the citizens get together and we come to this document. You do need to promote it. So I wouldn't be on the committee after that. It's over, but you need funds. I know this. You need funds somehow. So after it's all over, there would be a pool of funds that, it's not taxpayers' money, but it's a one-time thing where this resource, and over year, if it were to become engaged by the community, and I think there is, I just know people would be interested in this. It's popular in urban centers. In Montreal, they have this kind of thing in different neighborhoods, and they try to enhance the neighborhoods. I'm thinking of something as very, very grassroots, that we're at the beginning of growing. Places grow. We're going to be 50,000 people. You have to start this early so that it becomes part of your culture. It's part of your community culture. And I think that I'd like to just put this out. Like, I see cities and towns that grow rapidly. They repeat the same pattern, and then they just become bedroom communities. I've always been concerned of being a bedroom community, and I know that there are other organizations, but they're for a specific thing, like hockey or drama or schools, and I just sort of feel that being able to just go outside and talk to your neighbor and just have that initial dynamics. Some people do it very easily. Other people do not do that easily. They come, they work a lot, they're commuting a lot. It's just a way of creating kind of community organizing and giving them a blueprint to do that. And that's what the task force would be about. So I don't know whether that helps clarify it, or if you have any more questions.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you, Councillor Kittredge, I mean, you have an interesting idea. It would be helpful for me, what I'm recommending is for you to go away and firm up your terms of references to spell out sort of what you described to us, but give us more detail. And it would be helpful too if you could provide some examples of, you mentioned the City of Montreal had something in place. If you could give us some examples of similar programs that are in place just to help us to understand more. Because I get the sense that we'd all like to support you on this, but what you've presented so far, I just find it's too vague right now for me to endorse.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Kittredge, I'm listening closely to what you've been saying, and I was wondering, Steve, to what extent, and maybe you can clarify this for me, to what extent is this meant to be a response to the pandemic? And perhaps, maybe, and this is only a suggestion, was your intention that this be a kind of a COVID community response to the pandemic? Maybe it'll help solidify the terms of reference and your intention. Maybe you can speak to that, Steve. Was it as a result of the pandemic that you came up with this, and that's the problem unifier that you want to address? Mental health as a result of the pandemic, Steve?
Yeah, Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would be glad to firm up for Councillor McCray, firm up those terms of reference and give examples. For Councillor Foster, yes, I see people during the pandemic suffering for this. If you're new in a community, but a lot of it is just we're going to be growing, and there tends to be more and more isolation as you grow rapidly, and people don't know it. As soon as you get apartment buildings that are really large, there is a lot of people that don't do anything in the community, very little. That's been the pattern over. When there's homeowners that are more on the ground, it's easier. And so I just wanted some way of there being like some way to welcome people and then get them engaged. And it's sort of this initial part of it, some way of doing that, because I realized that during the pandemic, we're not supposed to talk to anybody else on our phone. I understand that totally. But after this is over, and if people want to just brainstorm about how this booklet or initiative can work, I think it would be very helpful in growing and the community. So anyway, that's sort of my answers to what you're saying.
Okay, so we're hearing some similar comments from council that they kind of like the direction, but they're unclear based on the wording of what we'd be agreeing to, and they'd like a little bit more work to be done on this. I think we recognize kind of where your passion is on this. As you talk, I do hear what you're saying, but the words in my mind just have to be flushed out a bit so we know what we're agreeing to, because this could be everything and anything right now. But I do think there is something to it. I do see that there is the gap in the community, and I know where you're going with it in a general direction. But I do think, if it is going to be a part-time things like what objectives have to be met, things like, is there going to be a time frame there? If there's you referred a little bit to a document or a booklet, who's going to be developing it? So a little bit more of concrete action that can be taken. And that's what we're going to need if we're going to go out to the community and ask for volunteers to step up anyway. So that's kind of my thoughts. I'd like to see this deferred and a little bit more time spent on this, because I don't want us to defeat this because we're not sure. I do think there's something in it, and but I would really be scared of passing this as is, because I do see a lot of work that staff is going to have to do to try to take this discussion and figure out what the direction was. I'd have a real hard time with that if I was staff, and I know they're going to have to help us with the terms of reference. So those are some of the comments that I'm hearing. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I'm thinking of deferral, Elizabeth. I think a lot of us are sitting here, Stephen. I appreciate your passion. I love where you're coming from. We just have to focus it, and maybe it's a point of where maybe you need to work with some staff and say, these are the things that are going on in the community. These are things that are missing. How do we get that into a, you're talking about a document about helping people set up neighborhood committees. I will say this, there's a couple of new subdivisions in town that some young people that I used to coach have moved into, and they all have groups. They've all put together groups on Facebook, and they get together, and whenever they could, before we were locked down again, they were introducing each other via backyard traveling barbecues or traveling visits, so they could do that. And I think that's fabulous, and that's a great way for the young people to do it, and they tend to do it on Facebook. But if you're looking at outlining a document, I'd be supportive of developing that. I just don't think we have enough focus right now, and I'd rather you defer it so we don't lose it.
Councillor Kitchus?
Well, I'd like to defer it then. I guess I think I would like to have 2 months, I guess, just to get the talk to staff, come back.
Sorry, I'm just going to have a quick discussion with our clerk just for a second, make sure I do this right, okay? Okay. Okay, sorry about that, Council. I just wanted to make sure I was doing this properly. So if we, your deferral, let me summarize and make sure I have it right, Councillor Kitcher. So a deferral for 2 months, we'll put it back on the agenda. And that's accurate? Okay, and then in the meantime, you'll have discussions with staff, you'll have discussions with other municipalities or other areas that have done this. Okay, do I have a seconder for deferral? Councillor Dunsmore, and I think that's agreement. There's no debate and deferral. So all in favor of deferring this for 2 months? Okay. And that's carried. Thanks, Councillor Kittrus, for that one. Now we'll move on to the second motion, and that's your staffing motion. And I will turn the floor back over to you, and we'll go through a very similar process. Councillor Kister, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mayor. I have expressed already concerns with how the staffing strategy and information we get about that has been put forward, and I expressed that during the budget time. After discussing with someone that was an HR expert and had done work in the public sector, I sort of decided that I would come and present and put forward this motion because for me, it's not clear in an objective, measured way how this strategy is presented us for accountability. And it's also, I also have concerns from a legal risk management aspect when there is not a lot of a policy or a process that's clearly outlined. So those are things that I'd like to have clarified in this. I have to say that I'd like to thank the CAO for forwarding his notes from the budget meeting about what they did do and also some of the literature, the comparable literature. Basically, the information that we received from the CAO, it's a good beginning of understanding the process because they're good questions to consider and how they're done, but it's not really a process. It doesn't actually give data on what data is considered, how the data is accumulated in an objective, measured way, and how a business case is prepared for each position, and how the positions are reviewed. It doesn't say that in a clear document. So it gives us kind of questions and things that they kind of do, but it's not a clear kind of policy process thing that you could see. Generally, I would like to see this happen because I think it's essential for taxpayer accountability. And we need to prioritize and see the staffing because we only have a limited number of funds. And we've talked about growth paying for growth, but we have other growth pressures other than staff. We have financial concerns with assets, and I think that people need to see how the monies are spent and how we got to deciding on these employee additional needs. And I think that you need to address this for taxpayer accountability in the budget process. And because and then the second thing is you need to avoid any kind of perception that there might be nepotism in our process. And then you need to minimize the risk management in terms of if you don't have a process that is objective and clear to the people applying, that there could be human rights or civil suits for not being hired. And so this process even though we got literature from the CAO, it's not, and he said it's not a policy. We need to tighten that up. And I would like the staff to do that. I mean, I'm not in the position to do that at all. And I think that I'd like to just sort of say a few things that have been said because of the budget, just before I read it. There was a understanding that this might be red tape. I'm familiar with the Federation of Independent Business. They use the word red tape all the time. And red tape generally is when government creates excess regulation and paperwork for the private sector. And in their case, it's businesses. And so this is fundamentally like, that's red tape. Wanting to get a clear and accountable is just accountability and clarity and transparency. And that's what our job is. So I just wanted to clarify that. And so asking for this clear objective measurement in an outline of a government process is just accountability and transparency. The second thing I'd like to sort of is the chart of municipalities. It's very hard from there to understand how Orangeville would be measured exactly for this hiring process that I'm asking for when they have totally different levels of service. Like they have police force and transit, and like it's not the same. So it changes. Like you can't just look at the numbers of employees, and you can't just look at the number. So the third thing is, what happens when you're growing very, very rapidly is that you want to, you need services, but if you don't do the proper analysis, you actually overhire. And you get, and I know this from experience of my own business, and it is, I tried to forward a document about bureaucracies, and generally this has happened in the public sector where you're growing rapidly, there's funds available, and then you get a lot of staffing, and then growth slows down, and then you have to deal with a different issue. So you have to coordinate this properly in the process. Anyway, I'll read the motion. Whereas it is the role of council under the Municipal Act of Ontario, Section 224E, to maintain the financial integrity of the municipality, and whereas it is common practice for a business plan when borrowing from the bank other people's money in the private sector, it is also common to prepare a business plan or staffing recommendation plan for proposing to spend taxpayers' money on new employee requests in the public sector, i.e. government. Whereas it is common fiscal practice in the private sector to not only focus on growth, but also cost control measures for revenues. So also in the municipal budget needs to address cost control measures and practices when there is also growth. Now, therefore, the Council of Centre Wellington needs to develop staffing recommendation business plan to obtain approval for the new employment positions. And it would include the following: one, a written justification. Why do you need this position? B, metrics on the departments to show it. C, any plan, program changes and additions. D, workflow analysis. E, any technical changes. 2, job description. 3, salary. 4, any challenges to recruitment. 5, any departmental restructuring that would result. And 6, any other jobs that become redundant from the staffing plan. So that's sort of what I proposed.
Thanks, Councillor Kittrus. We have that motion on the table. Any seconder for that motion? Councillor McElwain. And we will go around the table, and we'll start with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like in favor of Councillor Kittrus's motion. One of our main costs as an organization is salaries, and I've noted a number of times, and I've spoken about this a number of times, which is it's important that we manage and control our costs. I further note there's been many occasions where we've been told that new staff are required, and I have not seen the business case for that staff, just simply a kind of a vague assertion that they're needed. So Councillor Kittrus' motion has a lot of merit. And I'm being very specific here as far as the justification for a new staffer. You could use an example. If you have only a certain number of police officers and you have thousands and thousands of calls, it's very clear to demonstrate the average rate of calls or whatever the case may be, whatever type of staff you're talking about. The point is that clear metrics are widely available and ought to be used to show that the new staff are required, and we have not been doing that. So for that reason, I'd like to speak in favor of the motion. It's good business practice, and it's one of our main cost drivers. So it's an important way that we can control our costs. I further note that we're often told that we're growing. We need more staff because we're growing. I was on council about 15 years ago, and that same argument was used. And I note that we've grown, and sure we've grown. We've grown from 24,000 people to 30,000. That's a 25% more population. And I think staff, the number of FTE staff the rate of growth has far than just 25%. And I realize population is only one measure to determine how much staff are needed, but it's nevertheless one of the better ones. And what I have concluded is that the rate of staff increase has grown far faster than the rate of population increase. And these are the kinds of metrics Councillor Kittrus, I think, is talking about. Very specific metrics used to justify new hirings. And I have not seen them. And they're common in the private sector. I saw them there, and I don't see them here. And for those reasons, I'm speaking in favor of Councillor Kittrus's motion.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. Looking at this, I require this in my business for my general manager to request this type of information. But I don't always necessarily ask this for myself. And I wonder if, are we getting into the weeds? I think that we have the CAO who does this kind of work and must require that of their staff to put a plan together. What I find is when we go into the budget process, we'll have a recommendation with some information. But when we do ask the questions, there are answers behind it. It could be that we're sharing employees, we're using this over there. There's usually good information that goes with it. I don't necessarily know that we would see it in a full document because it does feel like this is a CEO or general manager's job, role to work through it. So in some ways, I love to get into the weeds, but I'm not sure that's our role as council. So I'm thinking on this one. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. While I agree with Councillor Van Leeuwen's comments about getting into the weeds, I don't think we want to do that either, but I think we do need more questions answered when the requests come forward to council at budget time. I don't think that, and we keep asking the questions fairly regularly. If we're providing the type of oversight that council is expected to provide, we need to have a bit more detail about how the money is being spent, and we're not always getting it. And I think by having a set of criteria such as Councillor Kittredge has laid out here in the hiring process, then and in the presentation to council, then it would give us all a better concept of when we actually need people. I mean, our spending over the last 6 years, by rough calculation of mine, is over 50% of the total township spending, and the staff spending has dropped off a little bit from the high, but it's not dropped off significantly. So it's definitely more than the 25% growth that that Councillor Foster referred to, and so I think we are hiring more than is easily justifiable, but maybe it is justifiable. And if we had these criteria documented, then there wouldn't be any argument or any question. So it works both ways. It's not meant as a negative thing. It's just meant as having a process in place that helps council and staff identify the need.
Thanks, Councillor McElwain. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I agree with Stephen. This isn't our job. This is the job of the HR manager, and I'm a little nervous right now because we're just hiring a new HR manager. That job is posted. We're looking for somebody, and here we are as a council telling that whatever those candidates are, that this is how you're going to do your job. And even Councillor McCrae has worked in HR, and I've worked with a lot of HR people in my job. And I can tell you, we put 25 of them together in a room, you'll come up with 20 different ways to come up with a staffing plan. It's the same as every other industry. This is an operational decision, and I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot bringing it forward before we hire a new HR manager. I think at the very least, we should wait till we have an HR manager hired and find out what she or he does.
Thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Where do I begin? I guess I've heard two different things. I've read what is in the motion, but then I've heard different things in Councillor Kittredge's explanation of what he's looking for. I also share concerns about that fine line of where council is getting too far into the weeds. I'm also hearing what Councillor Dunsmore is saying about we don't have a HR manager in place at the moment, and ideally I'd prefer to have the new HR manager come in, do a review of what currently is in place, and then advise what needs to be done. I've heard that there's confusion from council as to what is our current process for determining when we need to hire new staff. What I'd like to recommend is that Councillor Kittredge defer this motion to allow the CAO to come back with a written explanation of what is the current practice in place within the township for identifying when to trigger a new hire. I'd like to understand what is currently in place. What I've seen in the budget process is some of this information is already being presented to us in different formats in different places. One could say have a simple one-page document that lists all of the categories, and it's just a matter of filling the blanks. One of the things that I would be concerned about is controlling our labor costs and keeping the process simple and not getting into something overly prescriptive. So what I recommend is defer of this to allow the CAO to come back and explain what the current process is.
Thanks very much, Councillor McCray. And I will get back to, that's a referral to staff, I believe. So I'll get back to that. I'm going to make a couple comments first, and then we've gone around the room once, and then we can come back to your motion. To me, this is completely within the scope of our CAO. It stems from council not staying in their governance role. The whole reason that we bring on qualified and certified HR professionals in this organization is to play this role. And I see the list of items that would come to council for every staffing. And I see all kinds of conversations that will come out of that will invite council to get into the weeds. And we don't need any further encouragement on that front. We do pretty well on our own already. This falls solidly under the CEO's role. And I think it's just a way that council can get more involved than they should on directing the operations and telling our CAO how to do his or her job. The comment of Councillor Kittredge about nepotism concerns me a little bit. And that gives me a feeling that we think that that's something that we can't trust our current staff with not doing, and that concerns me, the lack of trust there. And that's not what I think this should be all about. So for me, we have a very good process that our CAO laid out on. Contrary to some of the comments that came out in the budget document, it's not a vague process. It's a very a good process that goes in some ways even further than what is here on Councillor Kittredge's motion. For example, looking to other municipalities to see if we can share resources. That's not even in this notice of motion, but we do it already because we already are concerned about cost. We're concerned about making sure that we don't duplicate what other county municipalities are doing, and we're looking at that. We already have 5 positions in that category. So that's going further than Councillor Kittredge's motion already. I also want to be cautious, and I'm going to talk to the media for a sec. Any numbers that you hear in this discussion, don't please indicate their real numbers, because the numbers have been given today that aren't completely accurate. So I just want to make that point in case some of these comments find their way into our local news source. They're not that accurate. One number that is accurate is that in 2010, we had 48% of our budget was going to staff wages, and in 2021 we have 44%. So not only has it stayed fairly consistent, it's actually gone down, and during that time we've seen significant growth. So any comments that we're seeing runaway staff increases are just not accurate at all. So for me, this is us trying to push the boundary on what council's role is, and we struggle with that on a regular basis already. I don't want to invite anything more to encourage us to think that we're managing the business when we're supposed to be a governance body. So those are the comments that I have, and I will pass it over to Councillor Kittredge to respond, and I haven't forgotten Councillor McCray. You had something on the floor, so I just want to be true to the process that we established and give Councillor Kittredge just a couple of minutes to respond to anything that he heard. I don't want us to take 20 minutes here, if possible, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments. I believe that this is a governance issue. It is not a issue of us getting too far into the weeds. I'm asking the staff to create the policy and process. I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. I'm just making the motion that it becomes very clear to us on these business case and the process and the controlling the labor costs and so this is just something it's for them to do, not for me. And so in that way, it's a governance motion. It's not a telling somebody that we should how to do their job. I'm not telling them how to do their job. I actually would like to know from when we're budgeting that it is very, very clear when they make the presentation of how it was done and what the numbers were to justify it. And that's the business case. And that's what this motion really largely is about. In terms of Councillor McCrae's idea of asking the CAO, I think that's a great idea. I think that we can ask him more questions. I think that whole idea of this accountability and making it clear, it came out of the budget process, this motion. That's what this motion came out of. So and it wasn't clear. We didn't get this information when we were trying to make these decisions. So that's my answer. So, I mean, if we want to defer and have the CAO explain it much more and how maybe the budget process would be clarified about these, the staffing strategy, it's fine with me. I'm just asking about, it was the information we got was just not sufficient to justify it. So and it's a governance thing. It's just, they need to be more clear, and I'm asking them to do it. I'm not doing it. So I don't think it's wading too far in. That's a misunderstanding of really our role. Our role is to do governance, and that's what we're trying to do. And that's what I'm trying to do here, actually. So, would I want to defer? Yeah, well, sure. More information, clarifying this is great. It wasn't clear in the budget process to me, and I think that other councillors have the same problems in seeing the justifications. So it's just about that. It's like we often do this. In the past we have, where we had a budget process and maybe it's on the to-do list of the what to do, a tracking list, and this is just kind of like that, except we didn't do it this time in this budget because it was very cut short. So I'm just interested. It's not clear for me, and I just would like to have it more clear. And so and also what I'm saying about the process is the justifications. There are some risk management parts to it if it's not clear, and I would like that not to happen. And going forward, these are all things for us when we're continuing to grow. And I think it's a good process to try to get that clarification.
Okay, I think it's clear what you're asking for with this motion, so I don't see any need to go through it anymore. Councillor McCrae, did you want to put something on the table? I'm just going to say our CAO did provide an overview of that process. So he's not going to be speaking because this is a matter before council. So I'm not opening it up to questions of our CAO. I personally can't imagine any more than what he's already laid out in his very detailed process. But if you want to move ahead and defer it and have that written out and sent back to council, I just think council's already seen it. So I want to set council's expectations on what they're going to get. Councilor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. Yes, having worked in HR, I'm familiar with everything that Councillor Kitchus has described. I also recall what CEO Goldie described to us as a process. My suggestion was if CEO Goldie could just put that in writing, just to give us an overall understanding of what the process is so that then it validates the requests that are coming forward to council. Because all we need to know as from an oversight body is that there is a process in place, which my understanding there is, and I'm just asking, let's have a written explanation of that process.
Okay, so I'm just going to summarize to make it clear. So what you're asking for is a deferral, and I'm going to make sure I check with Carrie that it's the right word, but deferring this notice of motion, so putting this on the back burner and asking our CAO to provide in writing what he told us during the budget process before we entertain a discussion on this notice of motion again. Is that accurate, Councillor McCray?
Yes. I feel that if we get a written explanation from CA Goldie, it probably will satisfy a lot of the questions that are outstanding with some members of council.
Okay, so before I get a second, I'm just going to confirm with our clerk that I'm using the right word as far as a deferral. Is that the right word, Carrie? Okay. Okay, yeah, she says I'm okay with the wording. So you're going to move that, Councillor McCray? Can I get a seconder for that motion? Councillor Dunsmore, all in favor of that deferral? And opposed? And that carries. So we've looked after that one. Thanks very much, Council, for that detailed discussion. Moving on to section 16, our confirmatory bylaw. I have a recommendation that bylaw 2021-04 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held January 18th, 2021 be introduced first, second, and third time and passed in open council. Move for that recommendation. Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor McCray. All in favor? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kittredge, second by Councillor McWayne. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thanks very much, Council and staff, and have a great rest of the evening.